Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Full Court Press. I am your host, Drew Duncan. Do not forget that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan 83. Additionally, you can find me on YouTube. Simply look for Drew Duncan. And, of course, the Full Court Press is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. And don't forget, we are wherever you listen to podcasts via Spreaker, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeart, etc. Simply tell your device to play the Full Court Press by Drew Duncan. Game number one in the 100th NFL season comes to an undramatic finish in Chicago. Green Bay comes away with a 10-3 victory over the Bears, and they not only win their first game of the season, they went on the road, they avoid injury like I said they needed to, and they take control of the division momentarily in a divisional game against the Bears. As I said, those were the key elements for the Green Bay Packers in this game tonight. You know, during the preview, a couple of the things that I went with were, look, for Green Bay, you want to get out of here with a win. You're going to be on top of your division. And then additionally, you want to skate without getting any injuries, because I've made mention over the last couple of seasons, it's not only been Aaron Rodgers, but it's been the football team, the same football team that just a few seasons ago set the NFL record for most injuries through the first 4 weeks in the NFL. And really quick, we also saw why there is a preseason. I wrote a short article about this. I've discussed this ad nauseum, that the preseason is for these specific things that hurt the Packers, and more specifically the Chicago Bears tonight. Getting some of these kinks out of the way with penalties. And I also said recently when I previewed the Bears and Packers that if you ask 100 different people, you're going to get 100 different answers probably. Tonight was one of those scenarios. We've heard some coaches say they want a preseason, that, you know, they can maybe do down to 2 games, that, you know, they really like the joint practices. We've heard other players say it doesn't matter because you don't get a game plan. Then we heard Chris Collinsworth, a former athlete himself, played with the Cincinnati Bengals at wideout for a number of years, say this is why you have a preseason. And I agree with Chris Collinsworth. Probably not popular to do so, but I do in this juncture. And we saw the reason tonight. Penalties really killed the Chicago Bears. Several times they were moving the football, and penalties, whether it was a holding call, whatever the case may be, were absolute drive killers to this football team. And we saw where it made a difference. Look, one of the things that I talked about when I previewed the game tonight was Mitchell Trubisky. And when I previewed talking about Mitchell Trubisky, one of the things that I went on to discuss was whether or not he could take that next step as a quarterback and be the guy that a defense can rely on. And I specifically gave the situation that occurred when I said, we get the ball back defensively, can we count on him to make a drive? And the answer tonight was a resounding no. Now, look, to be fair, both teams defensively put a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks, obviously more so Chicago, getting 5 sacks on Aaron Rodgers, one of them negated by a penalty that ultimately kept that drive alive and gave the Green Bay Packers a 10-3 lead. By the way, they held the football during that drive for over 6 minutes in the fourth quarter. Look, the ins and outs of this football game are real simple. Drive-killing penalties, a turnover at the end of the game when Chicago had a chance to tie it up initially. And really, when I was watching this game, in the first quarter especially, it looked like a really kind of an early 90s game. You had one team that was trying to be dominant by running the football and really shoving it down your throat and lining up in basic formations and even kind of using a fullback, and that was the Green Bay Packers, something that we don't see very often anymore. And then you had the Chicago Bears, who ran kind of more like a Washington style of offense with a lot of motion and some plays where they were basically trying to think, I think at a lot of times try to get a little too cute, to be perfectly honest with you. And it was symptomatic of, you know, like going for it when they went for it on fourth down, trying to do too cute of a play there. The first play of the football game, a lot of motion, and it's just like, you know, it's a first play. Why you're trying to be so over the top right away? But that's what they were doing. They were spreading them out, and at least they were giving different looks. That's what I was thinking to myself as I was watching this football game. And if you're a Green Bay Packer fan, watching initially, you're seeing the pressure that Aaron Rodgers is getting. You're seeing the clear frustration in his body language. But it ultimately all helped set up what ended up being basically the game-breaking play of the game for the Green Bay Packers, right? Top of the second quarter, they look flustered. You're coming out of a timeout from a television timeout, mind you, and you're about to get a delay game. They call a timeout, and I think that ultimately Chicago at this juncture is thinking, look, man, they look flustered. They're not ready for our defense. Maybe they were going to try something. Now they're not going to. There's no way they go play action and try to hit this thing deep down the field. Unfortunately for them, that's exactly what they elected to do. And it was the big hit, the big play of the game. It put Green Bay in scoring position. They ran down the field really quick. 4 plays, 74 yards, a minute and 24 seconds, and they get the only touchdown of the football game to Jimmy Graham, who, by the way, played pretty good football tonight at tight end for the Green Bay Packers. Look, Chicago's going to look back on this football game, I think, and they are going to feel like they should have won it, right? They had that drive where they're moving the football down the field. They get a big hit over the middle of the field, and what happens? Penalty after penalty after penalty. They go from 1st and 10 on Green Bay's side of the football field to being backed up to 1st and 40 at, what was it, like their own 20-yard line, somewhere in that neighborhood. Chicago ultimately beat themselves tonight. And they didn't even have to turn the football over really a whole hell of a lot to do so. A lot of times when we talk about these types of games, one of the things that we look at is, boy, there must have been a lot of turnovers. But there wasn't. Now, I will say this. Trubisky was living dangerously throughout the night. He made some throws that ended up getting tipped by defenders because he was throwing into heavy coverage, and they weren't able to come away with some of those tip passes. And finally, it caught up to him in the fourth quarter when he made the decision to throw that football in the corner of the end zone instead of just throwing it out of bounds, taking a field goal, and maybe putting themselves in a different situation. Because I'm going to tell you something, 7-6, 10-6 is still a lot different than 7-3 and 10-3. Very much so, as a matter of fact. Your play calling changes, how you approach the game overall changes. Defensively, I don't think anything would have differed for the Chicago Bears. Offensively, I think so. And I think they would have been playing a little bit more close to the vest. And I think a couple of times when they got down inside Green Bay territory, instead of taking some of the risky pass plays that they did that ended up breaking them, there was the holding penalties, there was the offensive pass interference penalty. There were all those things that negated plays where I think they would have tried to maybe run the football or do some screen plays that just would have put them in good field goal position. Right? Because at this point in the football game, especially as the game wears down and every drive becomes important, what starts to happen is if you're close, if you're 7-6, you start playing for field goals and trying not to make mistakes. Because one mistake can cost you the football game, and that is ultimately what we saw with the Chicago Bears. Right? They had the defensive penalty, which gave Green Bay an opportunity on that last drive where they scored a field goal with, I think there was 5 minutes left when they scored the field goal. There was a defensive penalty that gave them a first down on 3rd and 5 that pushed them closer and deeper into Chicago territory. And even though they couldn't get a touchdown out of it, basically a field goal kind of felt like it was going to seal the deal in this football game. And it did. Look, there was a lot of talk last season about Mitchell Trubisky, and going into this year, I think the overall feeling was, can he get to that next step? So far, he hasn't showed anybody anything that says he can do otherwise. To be fair, the entire offense played pretty bad football. They had a couple of plays, but it was always 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. Whereas Green Bay is concerned, I don't think that there's anything wrong with establishing the run the way that they did. I think football teams are going to kind of take notice of that, and I think as the season progresses, that's going to open up a lot more right out of the gate, first down plays for play action, and give Aaron Rodgers an opportunity to show off that cannon. He's still got some great weapons around him. he showed that he's still a very mobile quarterback. And as I said in the preview of this game, getting out of there healthy for Green Bay with the victory, those were the most important things. Because as I made mention of in the preview of that game, the year that they did have a healthy football team, they only lost one game. Aaron Rodgers didn't go anywhere near 10 interceptions for the season, was a clear-cut MVP. Yes, they were beat by the eventual Super Bowl champion New York Giants badly. However, they were in a good position, and I think this year there's a different feeling among Green Bay Packers as a whole. I think Aaron Rodgers is tired of all the nonsense. I think he's tired of hearing everybody talk about him in a negative way because for a lot of people, it is Aaron Rodgers could be great, but he can't stay healthy. That's the big conundrum with Aaron Rodgers. And as the season progresses, obviously, that'll continue to, I think, especially for me, be a topic of discussion. Regardless, Green Bay gets out of there with a 10-3 victory. It was ugly and beautiful at the same time. Green Bay, no shortage of penalties themselves. Both teams, I think Chicago did hit the 100-yard mark in penalties, a team that only had, I think they said, 12 holding calls all season long last year. And one of their players alone on the offensive line had 2 in that football game. And the Green Bay Packers themselves, by last check, it was like 10 penalties for 71 yards, somewhere in that neighborhood. So both teams are going to clean it up, hopefully, obviously, if you're a fan of either one as the season progresses. It's not over for Chicago. Still a very young season. And we're not anointing Green Bay to the Super Bowl. Still a very young season. But for both teams, where they're going to need to clean up and where they'll need to get better are those facets of the football game where I said. But I think Green Bay establishing the run early, even though it didn't look great in terms of the overall stat line, I think will help them as the season goes along, and they'll be able to use one and the other within each other interchangeably, and they'll be able to open it up, and it'll just be whatever works in whatever game. Very good defensive adjustments by both teams, by the way, really quick. I want to hit on that. Green Bay and Chicago both would start moving the football, and then it felt like the defenses were better at making adjustments within drives, which I thought was really impressive by both coaches in that football game. Guys, I am Drew Duncan, host of the Full Court Press. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan 83. Additionally, you can find me on YouTube. Simply look for Drew Duncan. And, of course, the Full Court Press is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. And as always, don't you dare touch that dial.